Almost 600 pages and still no explanation as to how that friggin' dead rat wound up in the most sterile section of the module? While that lack of information was disappointing on a more personal front, it was not all that surprising from a creative standpoint, as the introduction to this comically massive doorstopper of a novelization of Bruno Mattei's Hell of the Living Dead reveals that it is more of an adaptation of the original concept that was first drafted by the husband-wife, creative team of Claudio Fragasso and the late Rosella Drudy. What Fragasso and Drudy had envisioned was a large-scale cannibal apocalypse that, truth be told, might have rivaled that of the unmade Raiders of the Lost Ark with Zombies version of Day of the Dead that George A. Romero had wanted to make. But just like what would happen with Romero's costly first pass for Day of the Dead, budgetary restrictions would force Fragasso and Drudy's concept to be whittled down to its barest, most cost-effective bones. Those bones, which didn't even make a complete skeleton, were then handed over to the low-budget maestro Bruno Mattei, who, in the grand tradition of Edward D. Wood Jr., utilized mismatched stock footage from a handful of Mondo documentaries to try and give the resulting movie some sense of a larger scale than its paltry budget was ever capable of delivering. Character development and exploration was kept to a non-existent minimum, and the hoped-for biting political commentary on how industrialized nations or people cannibalize the third world, robbing it of its resources while also preventing its peoples from becoming both independent and self-reliant, was, for the most part, jettisoned entirely. All that was left was a cheap, shoddy, and yet still somewhat entertaining piece of Italian exploitation cinema. I first learned about the film when it was reviewed in the pages of Fangoria magazine, in a tongue-in-cheek and somewhat short-lived column titled Zombie of the Month, I think, because when the film was released in the United States as Night of the Zombies, it seemed that there was a new gut-munching zombie epic being dropped into a theater or a drive-in just about every other month or so. I did not see it until it was on home video, and I think I watched it all of 2 times, at the very least, and was not all that inclined to revisit it prior to cracking open Carter's epic adaptation. Doing that turned out to be the wise thing because, as Carter notes in his afterword, this book departs from its supposed source material in just about every way. While all the significant story beats and scenarios are here for the most part, they have been recontextualized or significantly altered to better serve a far broader and somewhat more complex storyline. Also making a welcome and robust appearance in some wonderful and Also making a welcome and robust appearance is some wonderful and biting, no pun intended, political commentary, which is in no way subtle and every bit as on the nose as the commentary in any of George Romero's zombie epics, or in the more preachy episodes of any and all versions of Star Trek, including the original series, especially the original series, which only made this all the more endearing to me because there was some obvious thought put into the book's just as obvious commentary. And a lot of that commentary echoes, or at least reminded me of, observations that had been made by Paul Farmer in his book, Fevers, Feuds, and Diamonds, Ebola and the Ravages of History. Also, a lot of the zombie action, as well as their evolving behaviors, echo or flat out reference ideas and images from Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, as well as Resident Evil, both games and movies, and David Cronenberg's zombie-adjacent films Shivers and Rabid, to name just a few. Which just made the book all that more fun to read because Carter knew what he was writing and why he was writing it. He also knew when to be dead serious and when to be a bit more tongue-in-cheek. An example of the former is the Hope of Project Hope is revealed to be an acronym for Humanitarian Operations for Preserving Earth, which sounds feasible. An example of the latter is the far less feasible sounding name of a political think tank organization that is called Foundation for American Reason and Truth, or FART. Yeah, okay. All right, it's juvenile, but I laugh. I will also note that most of the primary characters are better developed and a lot more intelligent and interesting than they were in the movie, which was also greatly appreciated. But what was not appreciated was the really frustrating, to the point of being almost contempt-inducing, amount of printing errors that were in this book. There were far too many obvious errors, missing words, or repeated phrases. At one point, there's something along the lines of, she let herself into the room. And considering this had a pretty hefty price, around about $30, I was annoyed and frustrated that there was such poor editorial oversight on display here. People should do better, especially if they're going to be charging this. Yet, as frustrating as that was, I still found myself really enjoying this over-the-top and truly epic return to form for what eventually became Hell of the Living Dead. I doubt any fan of the film, or fan of the zombie apocalypse genre in general, will finish this book feeling cheated or all that disappointed. So if you want to read a big chonker of a cheap and trashy book that is also just smart enough to keep you more or less engaged for its ridiculous 600-page reading time, whatever, I feel comfortable suggesting you give it a try. But honestly, one look at the cover will let you know if you want to read it or not.